Okay, welcome back to Exhausted Hero Worship. Today we're discussing the first two episodes of X-Men 97, which premiered last Wednesday on Disney Plus. And... alright. I know, another man-child who can't let go of his childhood and has to hate on things. But yeah, I did not like this. It felt wrong from start to finish. I honestly went in wanting to give it a chance. I wanted to like this. I hoped that Disney had produced an outlier, that another key thing from my childhood had not been stripped for parts and rebuilt as a sad facsimile of its original self. But here we are. Fine, I was trying to give it a chance, and the flaws just kept coming. I saw them. It did the thing in my brain where it wouldn't stop echoing, and, well, here we are. I'm recording this, I drew the pictures, I'm editing the video, and you clicked on it. So let's get into it. First, X-Men 97 is a series designed to be a continuation of the X-Men animated series that premiered on Fox Kids in October of 1992. I was 7 when that series premiered, and the key demographic, a nerdy kid who already loved heroes and cartoons and was primed for a new animated series to launch me into lifelong fandom. And boy did it work. Yes, I loved Batman the Animated Series, but I actually developed more of an appreciation for that as I got older. When I was in those prime years from 7 to 9 years old, the X-Men were it. I obsessively collected the Toy Biz action figure line. Having the 3 different Wolverine figures was a particular achievement for me. In 4th grade, when the hype was at its zenith, my friends and I all had binders full of X-Men trading cards. Whoever had the newest Fleer and Flare sets of cards was king, and I was in. I was hooked. As a budding artist who already was developing an eye for great illustration, I looked at those cards obsessively. When my friends were playing video games at one guy's house and he had like 3 binders full of cards, I was overlooking at those and letting them play Mega Man. I could not get enough of the X-Men. I would read the backs and piece together all the classic comic book stories piece by piece because my parents just couldn't afford to buy me comic books at the time. When we were out on the play yard at recess, we all were a different X-Man. Somebody was always Wolverine, somebody was Cyclops, somebody was Jean Grey, someone was Rogue, someone was Storm. It involved boys and girls in these groups. Everybody loved this cartoon. My sisters and I would constantly run through playing with the action figures and talking about it. So in essence, this cartoon worked. It roped in hundreds of thousands, millions of kids as fans across the world. It achieved its goal. No argument there. And so we all grew up. We became Marvel fans. We became comic book fans. We became movie fans. I loved the MCU up until a certain point. See my previous video. I still love superheroes. I still draw superheroes. I want to love the X-Men again. And later on this channel, I will have a whole series of videos dedicated to how the X-Men movies should happen. But let's talk about the cartoon itself. The cartoon itself, the 1992 series, was heavily designed to match the art style of illustrator Jim Lee, whose art was shattering comic sales records at the time and who helped the comic book reach its ultimate era popularity. His own belief that he was a good writer helped to destroy that era, but more on that later. The point is, as ridiculous and eye-candy geared as Lee's illustrations and costume designs were, they worked. They were dynamic, they helped individualize each member of the team, and they added to the epic feeling of these larger-than-life archetypes. The animation for the series was done by the South Korean studio Acom, who has animated such other notable projects as The Simpsons, The Animaniacs, Gargoyles, The Real Ghostbusters, and The Tick. They also worked for Warner Brothers for a time and helped make a season of Tiny Toon Adventures and Batman the Animated Series. There was a smoothness and a dynamic flow to the scenes that they animated. Although the animation was often rushed, it was highly engaging and captured that feeling of superheroes leaping off of the page. I would argue it was much stronger than the Spider-Man animated series, which aired around the same time. Looking back at it now, after a rewatch, the writing of the show was admittedly melodramatic and overwrought. Everything was life or death, love was painstaking, and these characters were always dealing with massive feelings. But in the midst of that, they were genuinely well-defined characters with wants, needs, and thoughts that were all translatable by a child audience. The characters played well off of each other, and classic X-Men storylines were well adapted, the Phoenix Saga being a particular highlight. And then, as happens with animated shows, the final season was not given as much money, the animation suffered, and the show ended on a down note. Following the success of the X-Men films, primarily the first and second films, 2 other animated series were attempted. X-Men Evolution in 2000, which would go on to run for 4 seasons, and Wolverine and the X-Men in 2009, which would run for only 1 season. Both of those shows tried to follow the path of the films at the time and placed Wolverine front and center. Wolverine and the X-Men came out the same year as the notoriously awful X-Men Origins Wolverine. Although the show was canceled after only 1 season, it was well produced, well received, and I counted among other great works that came out amid the adaptation golden era between 2008 and 2018 in terms of comedies. It was only canceled due to a complicated rights issue after Disney bought Fox, along with another project I'll be referencing here in a moment. Okay, let's get into this. I've given enough setup here, and if I go on any longer, it's officially stalling. X-Men 97 is intended as a direct follow-up to the series created in 1992. I won't go into the politics that I believe drove the creation of this series or the issues with the creator. There's been a lot of coverage about that already. I'll just say I do not believe this series was created to do anything more than capitalize on nostalgia and try to graft a very particular viewpoint onto a property beloved by an entire generation of comic book fans. Let's start with the animation. As previously mentioned, the original was heavily influenced by the art of Jim Lee. It has a roundness and a heft in both male and female figures that adds to the grandiose storytelling in action. This new series is oddly flat and overly simplistic. It has none of the flow or dynamic movement that the animation produced by ICOM achieved, and is produced itself by a different South Korean animation studio, Studio Mir. Studio Mir's filmography is The Legend of Korra, The Boondocks, Young Justice Outsiders, Harley Quinn, and Skull Island. Legend of Korra, which aired in 2012, was in my opinion their best effort, and since then their projects have relied more and more on computer-assisted animation, and it shows in X-Men 97. There are moments where the characters look like cardboard cutouts of the originals. The flatness of the figures and the stiffness of the movements brings to mind animation like the FX series Archer. Not a bad series, but nowhere near that early 90s art style. The characters all have their original costumes from the 92 series, but have lost that feeling of dynamic movement and roundness to the figure. Much has been made of Rogue losing certain features of her original animated form, but I'm not here to focus on that. I'm much more bothered by how the original show used creative camera angles and lighting to make these heroes seem impressive even in a relaxed state. There was constant movement and wind to aid in this impression. Here they all seem disconnected from their environment, just cutouts stuck in front of a background. The biggest deviation from the 92 series in terms of look and costume is easily Magneto. Alright, okay, let's get into this. I can't put it any other way. Magneto has been oddly feminized in his appearance here. And I'm speaking from an art perspective, not characterization. I'll have more to say on characterization in a moment. Just in terms of if I am drawing a face, the decisions made on an art level to Magneto's designs are decisions I would make on a feminine face. There's no other way to say that. In the 92 series, Magneto had a very late 80s mane of white hair that was very much party in the back. It kind of worked for him. The costume and powerful build for the character were pulled again from the illustrations of Jim Lee, who had beefed him up a bit. He was able to look imposing and impressive in every appearance in the original show. And now, Magneto in X-Men 97... Okay, basic artist breakdown here. They made his hair longer and more flowing. Not bad in and of itself, but he definitely has been hitting the conditioner. They made his face a little more angular. Okay, he's aged up a bit, fine. They added some odd lines around his face, primarily to the eyes and around the mouth that kind of make it look like he's puckering all the time. And they made his lips an odd pink. You add that to the angular higher cheekbones, and again, we end up with a more feminine face. Now, maybe the facial design wouldn't bother me so much if he were in a better costume. But boy, did they put him in one of the worst costumes Magneto ever wore in the comics. And yeah, admittedly, yes, this is from the comic books. Comic books sometimes have terrible designs. Just see any early 90s design done by Rob Liefeld. Okay? It happens. Artists make bad choices sometimes, just like anyone else. But I understand where this came from. But it does not look good. So, to break this down, we have the cloak, which is no longer bolted to the chest piece. It is now just a cloak that wraps in a very scarf-like way around his neck. We have this sleeveless number that he's wearing, very disco jumpsuity. And added to that, some long purplish magenta Jessica Rabbit gloves. It does not look impressive. It does not look imposing. This does not say leader of the X-Men. I don't know exactly what it says. But it is not a strong choice visually for me. In truth, the thought that occurred to me while watching this, and it was really bothering me, on what Magneto reminded me of here, it's Granny Goodness. For anyone who doesn't know, Granny Goodness is the DC character in the New Gods universe who serves as the main torturer and henchwoman to Darkseid. She trains his female Fury attack squad. This is how Granny Goodness looks. This is Magneto. I understand that this costume was worn by Magneto, again, in the arc that this series is primarily pulling from for his storyline. But first, there were key design differences to Magneto himself, such as shorter hair and less effeminate features. And secondly, it is fine and encouraged for an adaptation to update a costume designed in 1985. I'm fine with Blade not running around with green goggles and a brown hobo coat. I'm fine with Captain America not having wings on his helmet and wearing buccaneer booties. In short, there were a plethora of design options you could have gone with for Magneto. He's worn a lot of costumes in the comics and the films and the cartoons, and any of them would have been welcome over this. And I can't help but feel there were other intentions behind this overall design choice. The focus of this channel and my biggest complaint in any piece of media is always going to go back to writing and characterization. How writing is employed, how heroes are presented to us. And where the 92 series had a firm grasp on who their characters were and how they could translate that for children, this new series is all over the place. My best example here is going to be Gambit. Yes, the crop top is ridiculous, and in my opinion, nothing more than bait to lure in complaints so that certain ist words can be used against anyone that complains about it. I have a much larger problem with the characterization. In the original episode Night of the Sentinels, Gambit is introduced in the mall where Jubilee is attacked by a Sentinel. He has seemingly accompanied Rogue and Storm, who we also meet, as they shopped. He is on his own in a novelty shop buying playing cards. Right away we are shown that A, he is adept at utilizing playing cards. B, he has an interesting accent. C, he is a charmer who is flirting with the woman working the counter. And finally, D, his charms are working because she is clearly attracted to him. Then the Sentinel attacks, and Gambit swings into action. He introduces himself to Jubilee, immediately reassures her that he is there to help, and then, like a gunfighter, lights up one of his playing cards. The sound it made was so cool to all of us back then, and you know what? It still works. And says, "The name is Gambit! Remember it!" and fires it into the Sentinel where it explodes. Immediately as a child, I understood this guy is cool, he's a bit of a cad like Han Solo, and he has an awesome power. And finally, he is a hero who will protect a scared girl by standing up to a 50-foot robot. Now let's compare this to his introduction in the new series, X-Men 97. Gambit is introduced fretting in the kitchen. This is the primary place we see him in both episodes, by the way. He is introduced obsessing over his beignets, because, Cajun, and being chewed out by Cyclops for not helping in the rescue mission. Rogue joins him in telling Cyclops they have better things to do. And then Gambit, the hero, recklessly charges up one of his precious beignets and throws it at Cyclops' head. The only reason this little improvised explosive doesn't strike Cyclops in the face is that Jean arrives and telepathically throws it out the window where it explodes. Let's just focus on this for a minute. A member of the X-Men just threw a high explosive at his team leader's face because he told him to help rescue fellow mutants instead of playing around in the kitchen. Yep, this is the moment I knew I was not going to like this show, and it's about 6 minutes in. Look, I have no issue with Gambit being a chef. I do all the cooking in my own house and think Gambit embracing that is a fine character moment. I've never once cooked, though, and definitely never fried anything wearing a crop top of any color, let alone neon pink. This whole scene feels like a bizarre character assassination of a character who should feel more like Doc Holliday from Tombstone than Agador Spartacus from The Birdcage. Again, all love to Hank Azaria, and that movie is hilarious, but that isn't Gambit. There's a bizarre cattiness to his and Rogue's interactions with the rest of the team as well. It's almost like they're bitchy high school girls instead of two of the team's strongest members. Aside from characters that do not feel like themselves, the dialogue is stilted in several places and just awful in others. Maybe it's just the voice actor for Cyclops who sounds more like Chris Parnell doing Jerry from Rick and Morty than the somewhat rigid field leader of the team, but I think it's mainly just badly executed dialogue. Yes, the 92 series had some clunker lines, and the compilation of gene-gasms put together by Honest Trailers is a real eye-opener. But usually, the dialogue in that show was concise, well-acted, and appropriate for children. It conveyed the characters' emotions and needs from scene to scene in direct, understandable ways, and at times had some real depth to it. Beast saying goodbye to the AI he befriended on Apocalypse's ship is a very poignant moment. Compare that to Rogue's ham-fisted explanation of her powers and why she can't touch people in the nightclub in X-Men 97. It's not even close. Another quick point on characterization is actual abilities. First of all, I'm not sure why Morph can take on the abilities of other mutants. That was never a power he had. That's Mimic, an X-Men who had to be within proximity of other X-Men, and then he could adopt their abilities. Morph just changes his appearance like Mystique to match other X-Men. He can't change into Cyclops and suddenly do his optic blast, so I'm not sure how he could change into Colossus and have metal skin, or change into Psylocke and fight like her. That doesn't make any sense. Also, why would he change into Sabretooth at the very end of the episode so he and Wolverine can romp on the grass together like cats? First of all, Sabretooth is the guy that in Wolverine lore would show up every year on his birthday to beat him almost to death and torture him just to prove to him he could. He's a sadistic, psychopathic murderer that Wolverine loathes. Wolverine would not want to go play with him. That whole scene is just bizarre to begin with, and I hated it. In addition to that, Rogue can't just touch people and take their knowledge from them. She takes their powers. That's what she can absorb. And I have more to say on that in a moment, but just power sets here are really off to me. The last point of comparison here is the tone and content of this show. I think at its base, this show does not know who it is for. Certainly these first two episodes didn't. While I think the 92 series tackled some heavy moments and themes, such as the Dark Phoenix saga or Days of Future Past, it never forgot that it was for children. It was primarily an action show with elements of drama and melodrama driven by characters added in. Compare that to this new series where we have childish arguments over beignets alongside Jean and Storm discussing Jean's fears of Nathan Summers being born a mutant. We have the fairly innocent initial fight between Cyclops, Storm, and Bishop against the Friends of Humanity, and then we have the Executioner brutally pummeling Cyclops' face to a bloody mess. What it felt like to me was that this show wants to appeal to the same audience that a show such as Invincible does. It wants the adult tones, the violence, and the appeal that that show has garnered. However, it keeps having to remind itself that it's supposed to be aimed at children, and we end up with a tonal mess. Every human the X-Men seem to run across, outside of the government liaison Val Cooper, hates them to an insane degree. Yes, the 92 series dealt with this, but in a much better, more subtle way. See, the X-Men 92 series knew how to handle this stuff. For example, when Beast's girlfriend has surgery to cure her blindness, Beast goes to see her, and her father, who is bigoted against mutants, tells Hank that she doesn't want to see him anymore. In the very first episode, Jubilee's foster parents want to help her, but also are afraid of her due to her destructive power. They are introduced debating whether or not to have Jubilee participate in the Mutant Registration Act. Key word there being debate. They are presented as an overall nice couple dealing with a situation that has seemingly no simple or correct answer. That is far more compelling than an asshat doctor snottily refusing to help a pregnant woman until his knowledge is forcibly removed from him. Another quick side note here, this moment along with Jean invading the mind of Henry Gyrick against his will give Rogue and Jean a very rapey vibe in the way they have used their powers. I'm not sure what the show is trying to achieve, and again, feels more like something from Invincible or The Boys. My point is, bigotry on display by the humans so far is cartoonish and extreme. It was made very clear in the 92 series that humans more than anything feared mutants because of how both evil mutants and evil humans presented them. That first Night of the Sentinels episode opens with a dynamic shot of Sabretooth violently attacking police officers. He is a massive, threatening figure hurling cop cars through the air. The challenge the X-Men face is a twofold problem of having to stop evil mutants like Sabretooth who revel in their ability to hurt and frighten, as well as convincing humanity that they are different and are there to help. Overall, as a fan of both the X-Men, as a fan of comics, and really just great stories in all forms, I wanted this series to be great. But if it couldn't be that, then I wanted it left alone. More and more these days, that's where the fan mindset seems to be, where I find myself. What I wish someone would have done was look at a series that did all of this right, and that is Spectacular Spider-Man. Another casualty of the Disney buyout, Spectacular Spider-Man is quite possibly the second best, if not the best, comic book adapted cartoon ever produced, second only to Batman the Animated Series. It has a distinct visual style, great dialogue, great characterization, amazing action, and honors the source material. It captures everything special about Peter Parker as a character and is wonderful for children to watch and fun to watch as an adult. Its humor is age appropriate, but has a winking ability to play for older audiences, and it more than anything understands its characters and the world. This is what I want from an X-Men property. Not a tired misfire or retread of something I used to love. Not someone taking something and trying to mutate it into their own thing, to use a pun. But a respectful, fresh take with no one group claiming ownership or skewing the themes. X-Men doesn't belong to anyone. It is not just one group's story. X-Men and comic books in general, but especially the X-Men, were never about one group. They were never geared and made just for one set of people. They were made for everyone. When I was a kid, I had a lot of trouble communicating. I was later diagnosed as being on what was then called Asperger's and is now just part of the autism scale. I didn't know how to talk to people. It led to a lot of alienation and a lot of anger. It led to being bullied. And when those moments got too intense for me when I was in grade school, when I did feel left out and alone, when I did have bullies bothering me, I was able to imagine myself as Archangel flying up above everything and getting away from it, as Iceman just sliding around and having fun on the playground. That's what the X-Men can do. They are not for just one group. They're for anyone. Male, female, gay, straight, ostracized, not ostracized. If you just want fun action, they're there. If you want to see your own struggles in them, they're there. So I hate the idea that any one group is taking something like this and trying to make it just theirs. I would never do that or think that anyone should do that. And I feel like that's what's gone on here. I'm going to finish this by making an analogy that might seem a little odd at first. But the way this show feels to me reminds me of a moment that I had when I was working as a restaurant manager in Arkansas. See, I worked as a restaurant manager in a fine dining hotel in downtown Fayetteville. We opened with this amazing chef. This guy could make anything, and it tasted fantastic. But one of my favorite dishes he would make was seared ahi tuna over parsnip puree in a shiitake ponzu dipping sauce. I know, it sounds bougie as hell and way overcomplicated, but my God, did that taste amazing. I mean, it was just so good. It was sweet and flavorful. But then ownership of the restaurant switched hands to the hotel itself. The initial owner left and the chef went with him. And so the new guy took over. And the new guy meant well. He was a little lazy. He didn't really want to put in the same amount of work. And he just kind of wanted to make everything his. And so one night, I ordered that old dish that I loved, and it came out. And I could tell immediately it didn't smell right, and it didn't look quite right. But I just, I was going to be good about that. I was trained as a kid that you eat what's in front of you. You asked for food. You do not waste it. And so I took a bite, and immediately something was off. It did not taste good. It was bizarrely salty at the same time as being way over sweet. And he comes out. He can see on my face, I think, that I'm not too happy with it. And he goes, hey, what'd you think, man? And I didn't want to let him down. I just went, yeah, it's good. It's different. Did you change it up? He went, yeah, I didn't really know how to do the parsnip puree, so I just put it on top of some mashed potatoes and added some sweetener to them. And I didn't really know how to make the sauce, so it's just kind of like a soy sauce that it's in. I mean, soy sauce kind of goes with tuna. So I had an overcooked piece of tuna sitting on top of a overly sweetened hunk of mashed potatoes that had gone cold, resting in a tepid broth of soy. It was not what I wanted. It was not what I remembered. And my initial thoughts on this show are very much that. At first glance, yeah, it looks almost the same as the thing I remembered. But the more I went into it, just the worse it got. And it is so hard to explain the offense someone like me can take from that when the thing we loved is treated in this way. And I know, the people out there that want this to be their thing, they're going to say, oh, grow up. How dare you just obsess over the old way? You man-child. Hey, fair. That's what I am. I'm recording this wearing a t-shirt with Iceman on it, with a lanyard with Venom around my neck. Every t-shirt I own has some kind of logo on it. But I also am a dad with kids and have a job. And I think when I love this stuff so much, that places like Disney should keep in mind that I'm also the audience. That I'm one of those people that grew up loving this stuff and has taken my kids to every single movie almost they've put out. So it would be nice to be counted among that audience and to keep people like me in mind, or my kids. But to be honest, I don't really feel comfortable showing my kids this. This is not Spectacular Spider-Man or even Wolverine and the X-Men. This isn't the original X-Men. There are things about this show that I'm a little troubled by and don't necessarily want to put in front of my children. Or any children. And that's kind of where I'm at with this whole thing. So I will be continuing this series. I'm going to stick it out and see where it goes. I am not just making my mind up and leaving it. And I will continue to do these breakdowns. And so that is it for me on this week's Exhausted Hero Worship. I'm trying to produce a video every week. I'm working on my pitch on how I think Captain Marvel should have been introduced into the MCU and what her first film should have looked like. I'm also working on my review of True Detective Season 4. Now, if you did enjoy this show and you're just furious at what I've said here, hey, you know what? That is what the internet is for. Throw that rage at me. But if you liked what I said here, you want to stick around, then leave a comment, add a like. Don't smash buttons, but, maybe tap it. I'm going to continue to say tap. And until next time, maximum effort.